Well, kia ora, everybody. Welcome to Youth Futures event. I've been really looking forward to this event, particularly hearing not just a conceptual framework for doing some work, but really hearing real life stories of how this has changed. Well, we're calling it youth empowerment, and I'm going to let the speakers themselves introduce and unpack what that means and what that means specifically in their context as well. So my name's Stephen McConnachie. I'll be hosting this event, which will be mostly for the recording for you to unpack and then pause and rewind and take notes and really pull the goodness out. That's very exciting. So I'm just going to hand over to each of our guest speakers one at a time and let you just introduce yourself. So a quick sentence, what's your core kaupapa, your driving philosophy, and what's your name and current role as well, just to frame it. So starting with you, Briana.
Well, kia ora koutou, ko Briana Te Haara-Barr tōku ingoa. So my name's Bri. I work at Tōkina Te Raki, a Māori Social Innovation Lab in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. So what do I do? What am I passionate about? Rangatahi engagement, whānau voice or whānau-centric engagement and kaupapa, and just with a passion for getting our Māori and Pasifika whānau into better opportunities for themselves, and therefore creating that cycle of better opportunities for them and their whānau, and adapting that whakapapa-centric model of acknowledging the whenua, the land we're from, therefore empowering our whānau and communities to do better and stuff. So yeah, guess that's me, and I'll throw the rākau to April.
Kia ora koutou, ko April tōku ingoa, ko kai whakahaere ki Limitless aho. Kia ora everyone, my name's April. I'm the founder and operations manager for Limitless, which is a charitable trust focused on high school students and equipping them for more confident career decisions after high school. So we initially focused on a Limitless conference, and over the last few years we've been focusing on an online course, Limitless Online. So really stoked to be here tonight. Thanks so much.
Kia ora, April, and hand over to you now, Adam Sharpe.
Kia ora, everyone. I think that's how I say it. Greetings from the alien here in Thailand. I'm British. My name's Adam Sharpe. I'm the Director of Learning at Meta Future School, which is an online futures thinking school. And I'm also the founder of Futurely, which is a youth futures think tank that aims to engage young people in policymaking and development planning using futures as a framework. And it's a pleasure to be with you all.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to now hand over the rākau to Adam to share. For those of you who are here live, feel free to just pop comments in the chat or things that are standing out to you. We can collate that and use that as part of our Q&A afterwards. And if you're watching this on the recording, we would encourage you at any time to just put on social media that you've been looking at this event and this is something that came up for you. That will just keep this kōrero going, keep the thinking and the conversations going around this space, so that this is the start of something rather than an event. So thank you very much, Adam. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and great to meet you all. And it's a real pleasure to be here. It's especially a pleasure to be here with Cheryl. Cheryl and I think met probably close to 2 years ago now, where she had this conviction that her community could really benefit tremendously from futures thinking and building their futures literacy. And since then, she's just been a great partner, supporter, willing learner, and an ever-increasing voice, I think, not just for futures thinking, but also for the community of Christchurch and for all of you on the international stage. So Cheryl, more power to you. I'm going to share my screen now. Just give me a moment. I'm not really going to use notes. I think I'm just going to try and speak from the heart a little bit. This presentation is called The Case for Youth Futures, because unfortunately, it's a case that does need to be made. So let me just introduce myself briefly, because I think the context of my career explains how I approach futures thinking and why youth futures is my chosen lane. One's career is very unpredictable, and mine certainly follows suit. About 10, 11 years ago, most of the money I was making was through a band called Jenny and the Scallywags. I was lead singer, also backing singer, and also playing ukulele and guitar. And I started doing charity work for children's homes on the Thai-Burmese border, and that's what led me to get the dream job in the development sector at MTV Exit, MTV End Exploitation and Trafficking, where even though I was completely unqualified, my job was to build youth networks all over Southeast Asia to prevent human trafficking and exploitation, using all things that MTV is known for, or was known for: music, live shows, and adding things like workshops and capacity building and advocacy, etc., into that. So it's a weird and wonderful world. And then I started working more at the policy level for the United Nations, so focusing on youth policy. How do we create the enabling conditions in Asia and the Pacific to ensure that this youth demographic dividend that the region has, 60% of the world's youth live in Asia and Pacific, if we can harness their energy, their enthusiasm, their idealism to help achieve the sustainable development goals, what difference would that make to the region, and what policies need to be put in place to make that happen? And then that brought me towards the Asian Development Bank, who had a very similar goal, but were quite committed to figuring out how do we actually engage young people effectively in policymaking spaces and development planning. And I became the go-to consultant, and this became my playground for applying futures thinking and foresight. And I'm going to share most of my case studies from that world. Like I said, though, MTV Exit was just the most amazing education in how to work with young people, how to create programs that young people loved. We were, organizing these 7 to 10 day programs, sometimes in the most at-risk areas of Asia and the Pacific. I mean, really areas where human trafficking was most prevalent. Battambang in Cambodia and Prey Veng, some of the poorest provinces of Cambodia, to Myanmar when it first opened up, going down to like all kinds of distant provinces and trying to create programs for young people there. It was an amazing experience. I got to work with a lot of international NGOs, local NGOs, and a lot of young people. And I learned so much from this experience. And there were these fundamental principles that I've taken away from that experience and my work with young people. It's these meaningful youth engagement principles. And I want to share them with you up top. Because this is what really guides how I approach my foresight practice. First things first, it's critical that we embrace diversity and representation. So that's ensuring we're engaging vulnerable and marginalized youth as much as we can. We must stop treating young people as if they're one homogenous group who all think the same. And that's easily done, especially when you're working at a regional level, but anyone who's worked with young people in the community knows that there's no one-size-fits-all approaches here. And also that vulnerable and marginalized youth, they have a voice and deserve a voice too. If anything, it's our job to give them that platform. Secondly, is to create a youth engagement enabling environment. That means creating safe conditions for young people so that they feel confident to let their views be heard. Thirdly, it's strong and healthy youth and adult partnerships. So in a program, that means intergenerational collaboration, intergenerational dialogue. Both generations have a lot to learn from one another. And so it's on us to create those enabling conditions. For youth participation, it should be rights-based and it should be appropriate to their abilities. If we're giving young people things to do that are way beyond anything they've done before, we need to make sure that there are effective capacity building in place. And ideally, we should give young people the choice of the level of engagement that they should have. And finally, youth empowerment, that through inclusion in programs, young people should grow empowered, and the project will benefit as a consequence. So teaching real skills that they can take on and use in their personal and professional lives. So those are sort of, in a nutshell, some quite well-established meaningful youth engagement principles. And there's probably other ones, but these are the ones that guide my practice. I came across futures thinking only 4 years ago. I'm no expert. I'm still learning. I'm still a student. But youth futures is not a new field, and it already looks a few distinct ways, and there may be other ways that you've seen youth futures practiced. But one is this idea of young people are the future. And so there's this unwritten, unspoken truth that communities need to work together to create a better future for the next generation, like a social contract, if you will. And that is not new. You know, there are indigenous principles like the Iroquois 7th generation principle that says every decision we make should be fair on 7 generations into the future. And now you have the work of the School of International Futures, for example, who have developed frameworks to guide policymakers to make decisions that are fairer to future generations. And you even have in Wales a Future Generations Commissioner who's empowered by law to help policymakers make better decisions with young people in mind. The other angle is youth as the problem, and I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that some of the governments that I get the chance to work with don't see futures thinking and youth engagement through this lens. How do we prevent the age cohort most likely to engage in criminal activities from doing so? How do we bring them back into the fold? Then there's futures as curriculum. You know, can negative views of the future be broadened and changed? This makes me reflect on the work of UNESCO building futures literacy, the work of Kohar Chen at the Center of Futures Intelligence and Research, who, by teaching young people at master's degree level, has seen a significant shift in young people's optimism about the future, their openness to alternatives, their transdisciplinary thinking and solutions generation. So it's the idea that by learning futures thinking, we can create shifts and transform young people's visions of the future to create better actions, better behaviors in the present. I would say that has influenced my work a lot, and so has this, which is empirical research on how young people view the future. Can our engagement with young people, learning from them, seeing them as a source of knowledge, help us better anticipate the futures that are coming down the track? And this has been another focus of my work. But fundamentally, what is youth futures? And I love this quote from, I think it's Jennifer Gidley in her book with Sahel Iniatullah from the year 2000. It's empowering individuals to critically reflect on the futures being created for them so that they can actively create their preferred futures. That's what youth futures is. It's just that, but with young people. Okay, let's jump in. So this futures triangle means a lot to me. Now, if any of you know the futures triangle, it's a very common tool. It's part of the 6 pillars framework. It's common because it's easy to use, it's easy to understand. And that was why young people I was working with at the Asian Development Bank decided to go for it. I was hired by the bank to conduct an intergenerational dialogue between youth and policymakers from across Asia and the Pacific. And they didn't really know the best way to go about this. And they hired me as a consultant. I brought in a youth core team to help drive the program, something that I always try to do so that young people are having an influence on decisions from the get-go. And I presented them with a few different tools. And I said, these are our program objectives. Which tool do you like? What do you want to learn? And they liked the futures triangle. So I did a number of capacity building workshops with them, taught them not only about futures thinking, what it is, you know, benefits of it, also this tool, how do you facilitate it, and then just facilitation skills. Some of these young people had never facilitated before. They were sourced from a combination of World Vision, I believe, and also the International Youth NGO, ISEC. A mixture of very privileged young people with some not as privileged. And the results of this was a dialogue about youth economic empowerment, and I was so proud of the results. I won't go through it in detail, but really was impressed by young people's ability to facilitate intergenerational dialogues with some training, with some encouragement, and having a framework to think about the future in a structured way. They really loved it. And the results were tremendous, and I'm very happy to talk about this more in Q&A. If you want to dive in, we can go back to this slide, but you know, I could spend a long time talking about it. But their biggest recommendation was, we need to make sustainability the growth story of the 21st century. We need a new narrative for Asia and the Pacific. And it was really compelling. They said, wow, that was really good. Can you do something else for this other big program that we have coming up? We're planning something much bigger. Again, on youth economic empowerment, can you come and do something else? So I did the same thing. I brought in a new AI core team. I said, which of these tools do you think is going to help get us to where we want to get to? We wanted to create tangible policy recommendations for policymakers in the region to address youth economic empowerment. And I presented a number of tools, and the tools that they really liked was appreciative inquiry. It's an organizational development tool founded in the 80s. It's not a foresight tool per se, but it includes visioning. And there's a really strong focus on creating a shared future. And they loved it because they liked the idea of a strength-based approach and a collective research process. And they liked how action-oriented it was. They wanted to create a network that was going to continue working on this issue. This case study has been published in the International Journal of Appreciative Inquiry. I'll share all these links with you so you can read up in the detail of and this is like really good for practitioners who want to learn how to use appreciative inquiry and engage youth, because it's step by step, how did we actually do it? But the results of this were just tremendous. We had about 233 participants get involved in the program. And this is a strength-based approach to solving complex challenges, where we begin with discovery, which is what is already working. Then we vision, we identify a preferred future that we all share. Then we start designing and create the action plan. And again, what was great about this was the research process asked young people to get out there and interview people in their network. We had a lot of safeguarding protocols in place. We were working with Plan International. So by all means, if you want to ask about safeguarding, this is, as I mentioned, going back to the meaningful youth engagement principles, crucial that when you're asking young people to actually conduct research, that there were guidelines in place and they're not putting themselves in danger. But some of the results of these interviews were just fascinating. We're asking young people about, how they feel about money, about skills building. When did you learn a skill that was really valuable to you, and what made that learning so memorable for you? Questions about work, like when did you have a job that really meant something to you? What was it about it that really still resonates? And then questions around intergenerational collaboration. And then finally, around the Asian Development Bank's key focus areas, which is the digital economy, informal economy, and green economies. And we wanted these policy recommendations to sort of fit these pathways. And young people were tasked with driving the research and also, again, facilitating the dialogues. And again, this is a snapshot of all of these different policy recommendations and the dream that they were looking for, that they wanted to achieve. And again, a big focus on green futures, which has been a very common focus for young people for decades. A focus on sustainability, but then also a lot of young people in Asia and the Pacific championing data rights as human rights. Really seeing privacy as an important issue that needed to be addressed at the policy level, and all kinds of other insights. Again, I could talk for a long time, but I have another case study that I want to share with you. ADB said, wow, that was really good. Can you come and do this again, but at a local level? We've just invested a lot of money to regenerate the Bagmati River running through Nepal, running through Kathmandu. It's an extremely important river culturally, but it's been really filthy for a long time. There's a lot of waste mismanagement, a lot of sewage works run down, and there's a lot of fly tipping that goes on in this river. But there's also a lot of Hindu temples lining the river. It has tremendous cultural significance. But the ADB recognized if this investment in the river is gonna have any kind of sustainability, local communities need to embrace it. And in Nepal, over 60% of the population are young people. They're under 30. So it's a tremendously important demographic to engage. So they brought me on board again. I'm not gonna play this video. I just want to show you, again, same process, but I just want to show you one of the key discoveries, and that was really about young people's dreams of the future. Again, talking about visioning. One of the key principles of futures thinking is that our visions of the future drive our decisions in the present. Our vision of the future leads. It's a key principle. And so it's important, by engaging young people in futures, to give them the agency to create futures that they wish for. To, again, critically reflect on the futures that are being created for them. Now, I'm just going to skip through some of these slides because I'm watching my time closely. I'm skipping over the discovery. We're just going right into dream. When we asked them, you know, how do you feel about protecting the Bagmati River? They said, okay, this sounds good, but honestly, for my entire life, this river has been filthy. One of the kids said she used to play a game whenever her family went in the car over the bridge going over Bagmati River. The kids in the back would hold their noses and see who could hold their breath for the longest because the river stank so bad. And so they'd only ever seen the river as this, you know, place that, yeah, it had cultural significance, but never a place to be protected, never a place to be cared for. And so we asked them, well, tell us about your best experiences in nature. And the way they talked was completely different. The mountains of Nepal, as you know, Mount Everest, it's a source of national pride, but it's also a place of peace, a place of solidarity, of collective pride, and somewhere you go to reflect and to find peace. And when they embraced that vision and thought about the Bagmati River and the future of the Bagmati River through that prism, it transformed their attitude towards the process. And as part of this visioning exercise, we asked these young people to draw the Bagmati River of the future. And here were some of the themes that the young people came up with. A big focus on sustainability, you know, adding sewage plants and treatment plants and, you know, all kinds of like, you know, recycling spaces, lots of, you know, areas for waste management, etc., flanking areas like temples. So there was a focus on sustainability, but they also imagined futures around prosperity. And these young people from Nepal, their idea of prosperity is having their own home, having a car, having a family. And it's a dream that seems so distant. So a lot of them talked a lot about prosperity and the prosperity that the river could bring them. And the other thing was peace. There was a real need, and this was very broad feeling across all these young people we work with, and we work with about 1,700 young people in total, that they wanted a place for solace. They wanted a place for meditation and to feel, you know, at ease and to escape from technology and all the craziness of city living. And so they imagined meditation spaces around the river. And they imagined technologies that could guide them to where the best spots were for meditation. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think, you know, as we approach the 20-minute mark, the results of the program were astonishing. Based on the strength-based approach that we took and creating this compelling vision for Bagmati River that they all shared, in total, there were 19 local youth-led projects that were established after this program around zero waste campaigning, waste segregation, digital advocacy, park creation, renewable energy education, really diverse projects that were all youth-led. Some of them were so good, ADB decided to give some funding towards them to try and sustain them. And 3 of the projects were then taken on by the government of Nepal and continue to support. And these young people now work in these projects that they designed, that they created through their own visions and their own compelling vision of the future for Bagmati River and for Nepal. So I'm going to stop there, but I'd love to answer any questions you may have. And I'm also looking forward to learning from April and Briana and all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. I've taken lots of notes, and I'm really excited. I've got a few questions there too for our Q&A. I just love how the way you described it. It was youth led, it was youth driven, and it was using, in your words, creating the shared vision of the future. But then that vision of the future, that shared vision that was compelling and shaped by, articulated by the youth, that drove the decision making. I think that's both beautiful and powerful. So I'm really excited to dig into that more. So thank you, Adam. I'm also excited to hear how how vision and youth empowerment and how youth perspective, in a really practical way, not just perspective can be passive, but I love this really active kaupapa. So I'm looking forward to hearing how that has come up in April and Briana's work as well. So hand over to, I gave it to Briana first last time, so we'll continue that thread. Briana, over to you. We're really excited to hear what you have to share in this space. Kia koe.
Well, kia ora, Stephen and Adam, and I just want to mihi to you, Adam, or thank you for your presentation. It was really awesome, and I also took my own notes as well. And it was just really cool to see your passion come through in the presentation as well. Where do I begin? I guess youth futures. I think my core principle, I guess, is the whole concept that youth will inherit the future. So why should they not be involved in these conversations? Why should they not be at the decision-making table? Why there's no excuse really for them not to be actively involved in deciding, informing, creating, and having ownership and autonomy over the futures that they intend to inherit. Because, alongside inheriting the future, you also inherit the problems of today or yesterday, so we have to create spaces where we can allow them to have their opinions heard, allow them to be proactive in their involvement as well, which is a part of the mahi that we do here at Tokona. And I guess some of my experiences, it initially began with just engaging with rangatahi and just, getting their voice, getting their insights, understanding their aspirations for the future. And I think recently it's about transitioning into that space of how do we enable that for the rangatahi to actually have autonomy and ownership over the futures that they want to be a part of. So it means within the process of engaging with them, building that capability, that understanding. It means, some of the core principles that you mentioned, like de-intellectualizing the language that you use for the kaupapa. It means, reaching directly into those communities. Digital advocacy is such a great tool in this day and age, but there's nothing like being face-to-face. There's nothing like actually being active in those communities, meeting those people where they are, understanding their environments and their contexts within their world. Because, it's important to understand what are their guiding values, what are the local contexts and needs, and all that sort of stuff, to, I guess, create the space for them to feel empowered to do so. I hope as we move forward that we'll be able to create new words where we don't have to use kupu or words like empowering, because it's an innate word that means to action. But one day we'll get to a youth future where words like that will be replaced with something more inventive, something more aspirational, and something less out of a place of need, but more of a place of it's just absolute, there's no question about it that youth will be engaged. I think with most of the stuff that we're doing these days, it's about education. It's about creating the spaces for rangatahi to be, educated and aware of the opportunities that are available, but also to advocate not just for themselves, but also for their whānau, their mokopuna, their nieces, their nephews, their communities. Like a lot of the people that we engage with are Māori, rangatahi Māori, so it's, for them, it's not just themselves, it's that whole take the village sort of concept, you know, that that it's the interconnectedness, it's the relationships, and it's the reciprocity, that nature of Te Ao Māori, that worldview of giving back and continuing that cycle, that's been really important to understand and create space for that to occur, for rangatahi to be involved in a positive cycle of change for themselves. Yeah, I don't really, unless there's any other questions about like success stories, but I feel like for me, like the biggest thing that we can do is create the platform, and the biggest way to do that is to actively engage in those communities, build those relationships, and leverage on those existing relationships to further support others to have space, have a voice, and be in places of leadership. But that's me. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Briana. Yes, I've taken lots of notes from your one too. I particularly I particularly appreciated when you mentioned about digital advocacy is great and important and vital in this space, but it doesn't replace kanohi ki te kanohi. It doesn't replace the face-to-face, the relational stuff. Certainly coming from my background of digital, all things digital education, but digital equity especially, in when digital advocacy is the only medium for engaging and empowering youth futures, you're suddenly cutting out a whole bunch of people that need to be, their voices need to be heard. As Adam was started his kōrero with, that diversity of voice and diversity of thought is important if you're going to shape these futures that are meaningful for everybody that's going to, as you said, Brie, inherit those problems and opportunities. I love that quote. That really helped me see, Brie, when you said about, I mean, we always hear about youth will inherit the future, but when you said, Brie, about youth will, it doesn't just mean youth will inherit the future as a cliche. Actually, that means youth will inherit the problems and youth will inherit the opportunities. So to me, that just really grounded it in a really important way. So thank you for that. I do have more questions, but they will come after. I'm going to hand over to you now, April. Excited to hear about your work, especially my background is in education, so lots of overlap here. I'm excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you so much for your sharing, Adam and Briana. Yeah, super inspiring to hear your heart and your experiences around youth empowerment. It's awesome to hear about a methodology like the one that you're using, Adam, and the way that that's been recognised and impact. That's really cool. And likewise, Briana, just to hear about your mahi and yeah, again, your heart for young people and their involvement in their whānau and their future. So that's really cool. Yeah, so I thought I could share a little bit about some of my experiences with starting Limitless and kind of the mahi that we've done the last around 6 years and the part that youth engagement has had in that process. So I thought starting from the beginning of where my sort of engagement in youth engagement itself started. Limitless began out of a social enterprise accelerator. I did a 9-week summer accelerator focused on a group of people coming in with a problem that they wanted to solve or address through a social business. And over this 9 weeks, we did a lot of design thinking workshops. We did a lot of interviewing and really testing our assumptions and looking at the problem that we're wanting to solve and the perspectives around that and how we can address it. So I think that that being the process that started Limitless, it really gave me a lot of appreciation for the process of hearing a group of people's voices and ideas and experiences to be able to shape, you know, a future state and what we can do to address an issue. So yeah, that's kind of where my experience with using a lot of post-it notes, having really good open-ended questions that lead to, broader answers than yes or no answers, those questions that delve into the why and further really came from, I guess, to begin with. So once I finished that social enterprise accelerator and started with Limitless, I could really see the value of continually using that process of asking questions and continually adapting what we were doing going forward. So yeah, a few things that we've done along the way. We've run co-design sessions. These have involved people who I knew sort of in the Christchurch community that I thought would be, bring a really interesting perspective on a topic and be able to speak into the theme of what we're talking about to shape the future for Limitless. And it involved students that had potentially been to a Limitless program coming along with a support person, whether that's a teacher from their school, and bring these people into a room, setting the purpose of the discussion and asking some questions that could help us think about how we can develop a program, how we can make changes to our program, what are the things, where are the gaps, and where can we do something new. So co-design sessions were really awesome. And at another stage that we did were focus groups, students that had been to our event, organising with their schools to meet with that cohort from the school that had been to the event. This meant going into the school, bringing some food, bringing some posters and some post-it notes, and in their sort of timing, having a discussion together around even really practical things about the program that we'd run. Everything from the bigger themes and what they'd like to see more of, what topics we could discuss in future, those sorts of things, to, what did you think of the balance of speakers to workshops and getting everything from kind of the program related stuff to the bigger questions. So those were really awesome. And then a third thing that we did is we'd created an online portal to connect young people to further opportunities for their development. And I got to see a contractor that we brought on who's really done some amazing work in youth engagement, run some co-design sessions that I went along to with him, and that involves a creative element. So it's cool to see, Adam, the pictures that people you're working with youth drew, and I got to see him sort of prompt the students to look at the current portal and even just draw up and think about what their ideal future portal could look like. And it was really awesome seeing young people's willingness to share creatively and come up with ideas. So yeah, I guess those are a few kind of different spaces that those would happen in. The co-design sessions were sometimes, like in a co-working space, some in the school, and it's interesting observing the differences in the spaces you have the conversations. I think, going into the school that we had an opportunity to do through the relationship with the school did create potentially a more relaxed space. And so I think in terms of youth engagement, there'll be so many good principles out there, but a few key ones that I've probably really discovered. One is around how you create the space, which extends from, how you welcome people, how you set the tone and the direction of the discussion. I really liked, I think you said, Briana, about de-intellectualizing some of the terminology, I guess, that's being used and talking about your topic. I think my experience is that you can have high expectations for what young people will bring to the table, but jargon's not helpful for anyone. So breaking that down, and yeah, definitely setting the tone of where we want it to go. Even if you want to set any guidelines of things like using yes and instead of but, if people want to, add their thoughts, it's about building on the person before's. So I think all those things about how you set up the space are really meaningful, and even things like having food and really valuing people by, providing that can make a difference to kind of the space you create. Yeah, I wrote lots of other notes about it, but those would probably be some key things. And then also, I would say, just thinking really purposefully about why you're having the discussion, really thinking through the questions, and thinking through, I was thinking about different organizations, who's the best person to facilitate this, who's someone that might have some really awesome experience. And, if you're interested in running these sessions in future, go along and watch how they do it, watch how they create the space. And because, I think for me, that's been the biggest way to learn, has been thinking about what youth engagement spaces did I go to, and, what did I really enjoy about how those were run. So I think there's some really cool possibilities here, but what I would say for Limitless, the youth engagement that we've done has made the hugest difference to us making our program more effective. We've seen in the results that have, come over the time that we've made changes based on what young people said, have just been really positive. So I just think it's so important. Us being an organisation that's all about youth, it's definitely something that we'll continue to focus on going forward. So thank you.
Kia ora, April, thank you for sharing that. I just want to pick up on what you were saying about the creating the space being so important and being mindful of how you're creating that space. You mentioned both going in their timing, so working to the school's schedule and what suited the students that you were trying to reach. And then you also mentioned a bit later on about going into their space, and you found that they were more relaxed. So I just want to pick up on that with our first Q&A question to all three of you, really, and just jump in, whoever comes up with the first thought, but specifically around tying together, I think something that came up for all three of you. April, you mentioning about going in their timing and in their space and engaging. Bree, you mentioned about actively engaging with the youth, and obviously most of it and most of what you were saying was about going and every time you ran a project, you would bring in a core group of youth. So for all three of you, it was important that it wasn't just a box ticking thing, and it wasn't even just run a survey. It was getting that conversation happening in a way where the people you were engaging with, the youth that you were bringing on board, felt like they were honoured and relaxed enough to engage properly. My question then: how do you recruit, how do you find the students not just students, the youth who have something to share in that space? Because my perception as an outsider is there's a whole bunch of youth who need their voice heard. There's a whole bunch of people, which might be presumptuous, a whole bunch of decision makers who want the youth voice. How do you connect those two? Is it a clear enough question to run with?
I think so. Because we have two ways of how we gather participants. Either the funder provides the participants, and in that case, they will look at the conditions of how they bring them into the environment in terms of their availability, capacity, and willingness to engage in the kaupapa. And then it is, as a facilitator, it is my role to build that whanaungatanga, to create the space for us to actually get to know each other on a personal level. What communities are they engaged with? What sort of mahi do they do? And then generally our processes that we would have that initial korero, and we would, or discussion, outline the context, what's the project or the kaupapa of the day, and then we would just break and have a cup of coffee, cup of tea straight after that. So we don't start working straight away. It's about creating that relationship first, and then developing that over an informal coffee, just to really understand that person. So when you enter the space of working or co-designing or collaborating and all of that sort of stuff, you have some trust at least built in there to feel safe to even have those discussions. But then, there's other alternatives where you are, contracted to engage with the rangatahi and to find those participants yourself, which in my experience can be difficult. Like there's only so much of your personal networks that you can use without creating like an echo chamber within the focus group that you're going to facilitate. So like I said, we did try to use a digital campaign to get people involved, and that was really, it was effective. Unfortunately, it was in a COVID environment, so the willingness for rangatahi to engage whilst going through all of that was difficult, but it also meant as a facilitator, like you have to be able to be proactive to the way that these participants feel, because you didn't have established relationships to understand the context of their past, future, whānau, community, etc. So we, I think in my comparison, we ran a kaupapa where we used both sorts of platforms to gather rangatahi voice or onboard rangatahi to be part of the process. And with those that we found throughout the digital process was that they actually really needed the space to vent and heal and express their feelings before we could actually engage in the content. So that's so there's two different sides of people you have established relationships with and know how to kōrero with them and engage with them, and then there's the other side of those who you don't necessarily know what sort of context they're coming from, so you have to be able to be fluid in that kōrero with them, if that answers your partai question.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else want to build on that?
Yeah, I would echo everything Briana just said, and then I would add on to that. One of the biggest mistakes that organizations make or institutions make when they seek to engage young people in whatever the process is to try to train them to be like adults. So you bring young people into, say, a policy-making dialogue, and you spend weeks training them about dialogue and diplomacy and about policymaking and the ins and outs of the adult world. And it's a huge mistake, because you basically end up, you train them to be basically giving insights that are less valuable than the insights that adults would have given. And you train the youth out of them. And I remember during one of these big ADB programs, and we were talking about intergenerational collaboration, and one of the best experiences that this young person had had of working in an intergenerational group, he said, they just let us be ourselves. And the mantra was, let youth be youth. And that only happens when you enter into these spaces, or you engage young people with the right purpose, not for a tokenistic engagement or a tick box exercise, but because you genuinely value the lived experiences and the visions that young people bring to the table. And what I love about Foresight is that's what it demands of everyone in the room, which is just be yourself. That's why I love appreciative inquiry, because it's asking, tell us about your past and where you've seen this done well. What did you experience? What was your best experience? And that immediately breaks down some of the initial fear of stepping into one of these spaces, right? But it also tells these young people, you have value. Your voice matters, your experience matters, and we're going to learn from you, and we're going to design from there. So I think that's a crucial point, and it's a mistake that UN agencies, for example, many of whom I've had the pleasure of working with, make again and again. And the second thing that I would say is there's this enormous body of work now that says, given the right conditions, given the right enabling environments, young people are capable of leading initiatives, not just being in the room. So again, if we do this well, the results can be profound, but we have to come into it with the right mindset, which is valuing young people, valuing their right to be there, valuing their experiences and their visions of the future, and using those to better anticipate what's coming down the track. And hopefully that can make a difference. So I hope that contributes a bit more to what Briana was saying.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Okay, there's another question just being posted in the chat, which links back to what Briana was saying about echo chamber as a danger for just sourcing from those same communities of youth and same voices being heard. So the question from Cheryl: the diversity is important and often missed. The youth selected are the ones who have been successful in the current world or are not representative of the whole rainbow of youth. How do you encourage companies and politicians to broaden and to be prepared to feel uncomfortable?
I can chip in something here. So I was thinking about how this sort of, I guess, quote that's about not getting too attached to your solution. And I guess, I think just because I was talking about the social enterprise course that I did, that was something that was really emphasized, is not to get too to fall in love with the problem, not the solution, which is a very strange quote, but that's what we were encouraged to do. And the reason behind that was that you can become really attached to an idea of what you think the business should look like or the solution should look like. In this context, it could be the policy should look like or the program should look like, depending on the context. And I think that you know, over time, I can see why that was so important, because I can see how the engagement that we did, actually learning about people that, you know, had experienced the problem, where, you know, for me, it was around students needing some guidance around their next steps for career pathways. Sometimes it's so easy to look back at your earlier iterations and see why what you're doing now is so much better. That's been informed by these young people. So I would just say, that I think to hear that broad diversity of voices is going to enable you to serve the community you're trying to serve so much better and so much more effectively. So I think it's just coming back to that central purpose of why you're doing what you're doing, and yeah, knowing that getting those diverse voices in the room are going to help you achieve that so much better.
Kia ora, April, thank you. Just I'll be reading the chat out for the sake of the recording as well. As a comment now from Josh saying, agreed, Cheryl, great thought. I find that unless people are intentionally conscious about that, about broadening the voices involved, there's a bias towards status quo, and status quo is often what's comfortable. And what's comfortable to those in power is frequently those that mirror themselves, ending up in an echo chamber. So thanks for that thought, Josh, and thanks for your thoughts, April. Anybody else, Adam or Briana, want to add to that before we move on to the next question, around encouraging companies and politicians to broaden and be prepared to be uncomfortable?
Yeah, I'd love to add a couple of things. Firstly, it's a myth that bringing diverse voices together makes life easier. It's actually far more challenging, and adults are not the only ones who are guilty of this. A lot of young people shy away from intergenerational partnerships because they don't want to be told that what they're doing is off course, or doesn't fit with someone else's vision of how things should be. We all do that. I was in a project just the other day with UNDP in Pakistan, and young people were trying to select participants for a foresight workshop, and they were like, yeah, include those people, but don't include those people. They what was the wording that they used? I think they said, oh, they don't really agree with a lot of this stuff. So like, let's not invite them in. It's going to make life really difficult. We also, and young people also, have to confront that they are absent from policymaking spaces quite deliberately, for a number of reasons, but one particular reason stands out in relation to this question, which is they more often than not do not share the same vision for the global system. Young people, for whatever reason, you can call it psychology, It's pretty much a social norm that young people like to tear up what's there and start anew. It's a good theory for how change happens over time, right? It's a desire to start again. We have this in relation to our parents as we build our own identities as teenagers, the desire to create, find oneself in newness. That makes it much easier to keep them out. So, you know, how do we encourage companies and politicians to feel like uncomfortable is, you know, directly related to this question. I think futures thinking, futures literacy is an important part of this equation, because if you recognize that difference ensures that you're not going to have blind spots, if you see it as a critical part of coming up with better recommendations and better ways forward, of testing ideas with key stakeholders, then you'll embrace difference. If you see that young people not sharing your vision is not the bug, it's the feature, it's why you work with them, because they're not weighed down by what we would call weights of history. They weren't around when the United Nations was founded. They don't care about, you know, those moments in your past that have stayed with you for your adult life, that continue to shape how you see the world. They don't care about what you hold dear, right? And that is how change happens. So I think that that's how we encourage companies and politicians to be more uncomfortable, is they need to build their futures literacy and recognize to do policy making well, it needs to be participatory, and you need to include divergent opinions, and young people are not going to agree with you. And it's important that they don't, so that we can come up with better, more nuanced futures that don't have blind spots.
Thanks, Adam. I like that. And it reminds me of Peter Drucker's comments about nurturing dissent or fostering dissent, where if you just surround yourself with people that you know already agree with you, or people that aren't willing to dissent and disagree and call things out. And as Brie was talking about, the echo chamber, it can be dangerous as well. So I think that's probably a nice place to wrap up. I think as an outsider, I was treating this role of hosting you all as an introduction for myself in this space also as well. So I feel like this has been a good provocatory, really thought-provoking and challenging kōrero from all of you. And I think this is going to be a journey for me to unpack this and see which bits I will apply as well. I mean, I will apply all of it. Good. I just want to wrap up with saying that I really appreciate all three of you, and the whakaaro that you've brought, the experience that you've managed to somehow distill into tiny packages. We're all going to benefit from that. So the key takeaways that I'm bringing: creating space, actively engaging, making it participatory, not just kind of surveying, but also broadening the diversity to avoid that echo chamber, in particular to create a shared vision of the future, not just a paper vision, but creating a shared vision of the future that then drives decision-making. So thank you very much. I really appreciate those that are here in person. Join me in thanking our esteemed guests in our traditional Zoom fashion. And yeah, really appreciate this. I will definitely be watching this recording again and taking even more notes. Thank you.